Hello, I am Dr. Randall Oyer, President of the Association of Community Cancer Centers, or ACCC. On behalf of the association, welcome to our presentation of the ACCC 2020 Clinical Research Award. ACCC established this award to recognize individuals whose research has significantly and positively impacted patients, their families and caregivers, and their communities. It is my distinct honor to present this year's award to Dr. Roy Herbst. Dr. Herbst is Chief of Medical Oncology, Yale Smilow Cancer Hospital, Ensign Professor of Medicine, Yale School of Medicine, Professor of Pharmacology, and Associate Director for Translational Research, Yale Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Herbst was selected for this award based on his distinguished and effective accomplishments in lung cancer research, having successfully integrated biology and laboratory research, team-based science, broad collaboration, and community, patient, public, and private partnerships that have served as a roadmap and role model for others. Dr. Herbst has been a pioneer of personalized medicine, immunotherapy, biomarkers, and umbrella trials, having developed and served as principal investigators for some of our most successful trials in advanced stage lung cancer. The work of Dr. Herbst and his team has importantly led to the approval of several treatments that have revolutionized lung cancer care, improved patient survival, and changed patient expectations. Dr. Herbst is nationally known for his leadership and advocacy work, having testified on the importance of medical research before the House of Representatives 21st Century Cures Committee, having served on the National Academy of Medicine's Cancer Policy Forum, focusing on policy issues in personalized medicine and tobacco control, and for authorship or co-authorship of more than 350 publications, including a recent high-profile review of 20 years of progress in lung cancer treatment. ACCC is pleased to acknowledge Dr. Roy Herbst for his extraordinary clinical research accomplishment with this year's ACCC Clinical Research Award.
Thank you, Dr. Oyer, for that wonderful introduction. And I thank the ACCC for this wonderful award. It's really so nice to be recognized by a society that takes care of cancer patients in the community. I also want to thank my research team shown here who have helped me over the last 10 years here at Yale. Here are my disclosures. Well, I'm going to talk today briefly about lung cancer and the burden of lung cancer and how we've made great progress in recent years. Lung cancer is the leading cause of death in most countries, as shown. In the United States, we have 234,000 new cases a year, 13.5% of cancer cases, and 154,000 deaths, 25% of all cancer deaths. 85% of lung cancer is non-small cell lung cancer, which I'll focus on today. Tobacco use is the single largest preventable cause of lung cancer, leading to 30% of all cancer deaths. Well, at Yale, we have a mix of academic and community practices. Shown here are the different sites where we deliver care, 15 different centers throughout Connecticut. Actually, we have one now in Westerly, Rhode Island. You can see New Haven, shown here rather centrally. This is where I'm sitting today. But we know that 45% of newly diagnosed cancer patients in Connecticut have a center nearby and come to us for their care. And very importantly, we have clinical trials running at all the different places, and 25% of our therapeutic enrollment was from our sites other than New Haven, something we've worked very hard on and I'm very proud of. Well, there's been progress in lung cancer, and you can see that on these two curves on the left. You can see in men and women that lung cancer death rates are coming down, more in men with a little bit more of a lag in women, but clearly there's been great progress over the last 20 plus years, and I'm going to try to tell you why. You can see if you look at men, the incidence is down by 2.6% a year, but the mortality 4.3%. So clearly something happening with therapy, not just smoking cessation, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then look at women, the incidence is going down by 1.2%, but the mortality by 3.1%. So clearly some benefit being seen. Well, it's the new era for lung cancer in the last 20 years. We've seen new chemotherapy. We've seen anti-angiogenic therapy. We've seen a host of genomic targets. We've seen targeted therapies, EGFR inhibitors, ALK inhibitors. And then in the last 5-6 years, we've seen immunotherapy. So all of these different therapies have come to bear. I'm going to show you just a fraction of this in the next 10 minutes. And then recently, adjuvant therapy with targeted therapy, which will be part of my talk. So the 5-year survival in lung cancer in 1997, which is when I started and finished my fellowship at Dana-Farber in Boston, was 13%, and now it's 22% just at the end of last year, and perhaps a little higher even when the New Year statistics come out. So I'm going to tell you about smoking and cancer, cessation, lung cancer screening, and e-cigarettes, then the promise and limitations of targeted therapy and immunotherapy, and then the next steps, innovative trial designs, personalized immunotherapy, and how we're treating the diverse and minority populations that are succumbing to this disease. First, smoking and cancer. The Surgeon General's report came out in 1964. Since then, there have been 17.7 million smoking-related deaths. Smoking is linked to 17 different types of cancer. Cessation at any age can reduce the risk of cancer occurrence. But there have been 8 million fewer premature smoking-related deaths due to tobacco control. Not nearly enough, but we are making progress. Smoking cessation programs currently involve counseling and treatment, some drug therapy. African American adults are less successful at quitting than non-Hispanic whites and Hispanic adults. And you can see on the right, you can see the percentage of adults aged 18 and older who reported tobacco product use. You can see on the left panel by race. This is actually American Indian, Alaskan Natives. You can see Asians, Hispanics, African American, and white populations. You can see that income makes a difference, higher versus lower income, and also other ways that people identify themselves. As you can see, different groups have different risks of lung cancer, of tobacco use, as you can see. Well, we're working very hard on this. We're using a personalized intervention project for tobacco treatment here at Yale as part of our lung SPORE, this being led by Ben Toll and Lisa Fuchsito. So this trial just finished, where we took patients who had lung nodules. So lung screening now is done for adults who have smoked for 30-pack years and are between the ages of 50 and 80 pretty much. And they can actually come in for screening. And when they do, we randomize them to a trial where they either get what's called gain-frame messaging, meaning a more positive approach to smoking cessation. Smoking will make you feel better, as opposed to scaring them with some of these very dramatic, visuals that you see on the back of cigarette cartons with standard cessation treatment or with standard cessation treatment alone. And then once they've gotten through that first period, we then use biomarker feedback to help them. There I am actually in the machine. We look at skin carotenoids, and actually higher levels of skin carotenoids correlate with less smoking. So we actually can use this biofeedback, and it's amazing how these patients really enjoy hearing the feedback, especially when they haven't been smoking. You can see the study has served a diverse, underserved population of long-term heavy smokers. You can see the race and ethnicity of the patients we're treating here at Yale New Haven Hospital, and you can see the different types of insurance. Many of these patients are on Medicare or Medicaid, and we're providing this service here at Yale to a very diverse population. And on average, the patients had smoked 1 pack of cigarettes a day for 50 years, so that's pretty high. So that's a very important aspect of lung cancer treatment, smoking cessation. What about the promise and limitations of targeted therapy and immunotherapy? Well, I've seen this during the course of my career. I'm very fortunate as a fellow at MD Anderson in 1997, working with Ki Hong and John Mendelsohn. I became involved in some of the earliest trials of a drug called gefitinib, ZD1839, an EGFR tyrosine kinase inhibitor, of course, working on the receptor in the internal tyrosine kinase domain. And we started to see responses. Here's a patient with widespread lung disease with a dramatic response to the oral agent. And this is published with my colleague, actually, Pat LaRusso and others, in around 2000. But patients such as the woman here could live for many years now on these oral drugs with lung cancer. It wasn't cured. it would come back, and it ultimately did, but living with lung cancer. So we had a whole new paradigm. You might not cure your cancer, but you can control your cancer, just like you control heart disease or diabetes. And this was really the dawn of targeted therapy. Well, here you can see the bit of the history of targeted therapy from 1997 to present day. Over the course of more than 20 years, EGFR TKIs have redefined treatment for patients with EGFR mutated advanced disease. Osimertinib is a third generation EGFR TKI. So as opposed to gefitinib, it's more EGFR mutation receptor specific. It has fewer side effects, meaning less rash, less GI side effects. And also it has very good penetration into the central nervous system. And the efficacy and safety of this drug has been shown to be superior to the first generation drugs, or olaparib and gefitinib, in a clinical trial called FLORA. So what we've done over this period of time is these drugs first became approved in the second line setting. They then became approved in the first line setting. Then we have osimertinib in the second line setting, and then osimertinib in the first line setting. And now, because of its safety profile, it was used in the adjuvant setting. So at ASCO this year, many of you probably saw, I presented the ADORA trial. This was a 680 patient trial where osimertinib was used after resection of patients with lung cancer, stage 1, 2, or 3A disease, and R0 resection. Patients could have chemotherapy if it was indicated. They all had EGFR mutations, and then they were randomized either to osimertinib or a placebo. And here you can see in the stage 2 and 3 patients, here's the osimertinib versus the placebo. Hazard ratio here was 0.17, highly significant. Here you can see the patients, when you add the 1Bs in, a group of patients who would have done well, probably anyhow. More than half of these patients are probably cured. But here you can see the osimertinib versus placebo, hazard ratio 0.20. These were results better than expected, and I think really show, as far as disease-free survival is concerned, that using these targeted therapies in the adjuvant setting are a real new paradigm. And then if that wasn't enough, here's the CNS DFS, so disease-free survival in the brain. The blue are the patients who had osimertinib versus the yellow are the placebo. And what you can see is that it prevents recurrence. 98% of patients are disease-free here versus only 82% disease-free in the brain. So protecting the cancer from metastasizing. This trial continues to be ongoing as we await survival results, but clearly benefits seen for patients with lung cancer, moving the best drugs earlier. And that was something that my late mentor, Josh Fidler, he passed away just earlier this year, taught us that if you took your best surgery, you cut out the tumor, you took your best chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy, perhaps even radiation, you still have the risk that these patients will recur. But if you use targeted therapy now, targeting the specific mutations, we can take those therapies and make them even better, preventing metastases to the brain, liver, and bone. I just showed you the brain. So that's the paradigm, targeted therapy, helping patients live longer. Patients will recur in the metastatic setting. The hope is in the adjuvant setting, where we're treating patients earlier, but they have less heterogeneous disease, and they also have fewer cancer cells. They might be cured. Now, of course, the paradigm is to look for other driver mutations. So at all of our sites, we're doing some sort of profiling technique, and we're looking now for EGFR, ALK, MET, ERB2 and 3, ROS, RET, NTRK, and KRAS in clinical trials, but those data are, of course, looking very promising. So what about immunotherapy? We went from the targeted therapy, and now we're in the era where we're using the immune system to target therapy, and lung cancer has been one of the prime examples of where this new therapy works. Here at Yale, I've been here about 10 years. This is one of the longest patients ever treated with immunotherapy, patient of Scott Gettinger, my colleague here at Yale, who came in with squamous lung cancer, failed 3 prior chemotherapy regimens. You can see a great deal of disease in the chest, in the liver. Here's more disease, here's more disease. Within just months, actually, patient had a complete response. But more importantly, she's alive 10 plus years later, living with lung cancer. You can almost make the case to ask, is she cured? And this really is the work of my team. And this is Li-Ping Chen, one of the immunologists at Yale. He actually is credited with discovering PD-L1. Mario Snow, Harriet Kluger, my colleagues, Ed Kaftan. They worked with Dr. Gettinger on some of those earliest studies of nivolumab. And actually, we were received an award from the Clinical Translational Society, a Team Science Award in 2018. But look at these data. This is from that first trial of nivolumab in advanced lung cancer. So these were highly pretreated patients. Scott Gettinger was the leader of this trial, just recently published this in Journal of Clinical Oncology. At 5 years, 16% of patients with metastatic lung cancer are alive. Now, for all of you who treat lung cancer, which I bet are most of you, you know that with chemotherapy, that would have been 0. In fact, the curve would have pretty much gone straight down. So it's really this tail of the curve. These patients that live for a long time, we've got to figure out who are those patients, why do they live so long, and the goal is now to get more of these patients to do better with immunotherapy. At my site, my colleagues in the lung program, Dr. Goldberg, working with Dr. Kluger, who I already introduced, and Veronica Chang, a neurosurgeon, did a trial very early on, an investigator-initiated trial, which included patients from all of our community sites of pembrolizumab, another PD-1 inhibitor, patients with small brain metastases treated with this drug. And what did they show? That patients with brain metastases in orange, their disease responded pretty much equally to the extracerebral disease, so the disease in the chest and elsewhere, including in this patient. What's the point? You can use these drugs early on in patients, perhaps even avoiding the radiation and some of the cognitive side effects that you might see. Investigator-initiated work that was very important. This is a recent trial that I was a lead author on in the New England Journal of Medicine with colleagues. This is atezolizumab, a PD-L1 inhibitor. And what do you see? This is TC3, IC3. So this is selecting patients with high PD-L1, either 50% or more of the tumor cells positive, or 10% more of the immune cells positive. And here you can see the atezolizumab versus the control. So clearly an improvement here, hazard ratio 0.59. We're in a new era. And then, of course, these are the most long-term data, historic data from ESMO this year, presented by Julie Bramer with pembrolizumab, 5-year data. Here you can see almost actuarial data at 5 years. 31.9% of patients who are PD-L1 more than 50% are alive at 5 years versus 16.3% of the control. Now, the control patients who got chemotherapy probably are benefiting from crossover, about 60 to 70% crossed over, but still look at this very dramatic result. But if you look at progression-free survival, you can see that at 36 months, almost all the patients recurred, meaning that only 22.8% of patients have not recurred. So clearly there is more work to do, but these are phenomenal tails on these curves. And we have to understand the science, and I have a short talk today, but my group, we have a lung spore here. This is Katie Paletti, a tenured associate professor in our pathology group, Kurt Schauper, a pathologist at Yale. They've done work to show that if you lose beta-2 microglobulin, you no longer respond to immunotherapy. Or you can look at quantitative immunofluorescence and look at patterns of patients who might benefit from immunotherapy versus who don't. I predict that in a few years, we'll be using biomarker assays like this for many patients. We need to look at new combinations. The field's now moving towards new combinations of immunotherapy, whether it be cell therapies, vaccines, combinations with chemotherapy, targeted therapy, other checkpoint inhibitors shown here. All of this is going to be going forward. We're running these trials at our sites, and the science, as I've mentioned, is going to really hopefully guide the next use of these drugs. We're doing a lot of work here at Yale. I'm very fortunate. I'm surrounded by a wonderful team of investigators who have a specialized program of research excellence through the NCI in lung cancer, first funded in 2015, just refunded a few months ago. We had a Zoom cocktail party, which is the theme this year. But we're targeting immunotherapy. We're targeting EGFR resistance. We're targeting smoking cessation, all working from the lab to the clinic and back again. So we're waiting for personalized immunotherapy. And I think we're going to see it, bringing science to the clinic, to the community. In my last minute, I just want to give you some next steps, because boy, is it exciting. Personalized immunotherapy. Well, I was mentored, and the late Wan Ki Hong, he passed away almost 2 years ago. But when I worked with him at MD Anderson, we had something called the BATTLE trial, biomarker-assisted targeted therapy for lung cancer elimination. He taught that the way to treat patients was to get a biopsy of their tumor, shown here with a CT-guided biopsy, get a biomarker profile, and then treat them with biomarkers. And I would urge everyone listening, that's going to be our next step. personalized targeted therapy. And here you can see Key and our entire group. There's Scott Lippman, Jack Lee, our statistician, Ed Kim is in here someplace. Really a whole team working together to treat these patients. I've been working with Ellen Siegel recently from the Friends of Cancer Research on the lung map, the lung master protocol. Work closely with my friend Valerie Papadimitricopoulou, David Gendera, another co-leader. The idea is that we have a trial where we're taking drugs to the community with personalized approaches. I'll show you. We screen patients with a foundation medicine profile. You'll see in the next slide, this trial is a public-private partnership. Free profiling is available. It's open at almost 700 sites. If a patient has a specific biomarker, they go on a biomarker-driven arm, whether it be a KRAS inhibitor, a RET inhibitor, LOXO292, a PARP inhibitor, rucaparib. We've studied PI3 kinase, FGR, a whole bunch of different inhibitors. Or if they don't have a specific driver mutation, they go on an immunotherapy combination, which is ongoing right now. This is a master protocol that takes all patients with refractory non-small cell lung cancer. Look at all these sites. No, this is not a COVID map. These are sites that have lung cancer trials open through the cooperative groups that are offering this trial. The newest iteration of this, we've been doing this trial for 6 years, but the version that includes all tumor types in the refractory setting opened in January 2019, almost 2 years ago. We have 718 sites with IRB approvals, over 1,700 patients enrolled, almost all of these in community sites. We even pre-screen patients in the frontline setting. You can send the tissue off so that you're ready for the refractory setting if and when that happens. So you can see the lung map. It's a public-private partnership leveraging the National Clinical Trials Network. We're at 500 patients per year, actually more. Biomarker selected trials, industry support. It's a public-private partnership, collaboration with the FDA, genomic profiling, and it really is a new paradigm. And I'll let you read these recommendations. It's really to take the most innovative trials and get them to patients, diverse patients. I even was fortunate to testify before Congress on this, and it's actually part of the 21st Century Cures Act. We have to fight. We need access to patient care. Every year I join, I'm sure some of you join as well. I join ASCO and AACR and other groups, and we meet with our congressional leaders. This is Rosa DeLauro, who's our local congresswoman. I'm sure you recognize her. We're really trying to work to bring access and funding for trials and access to drugs to the community. We have to reach out to our community. Here in New Haven, I work with a group called the Cultural Ambassadors. These are local leaders from different civic groups, from different churches, and we're reaching out to them. We do radio shows. This is a Tom Fickling show that I did a few weeks ago, and we talk about lung map. We talk about our clinical trials. We have to make people trust, and we have to get patients of all races and ethnicities onto clinical studies. We have a community firewall project at Yale, working closely with Dr. Beth Jones, shown here. We received money from the Bristol-Myers Squibb Foundation to fight disparities, to bring clinical trials to the community through patient navigation. Here you can see we're using our navigators to bring masks to the population during COVID crisis. So really what I've tried to show you in a very quick talk is that policy plus science brings progress. We must continue to work on cancer policy, new trials, innovation, prevention, screening, regulatory reform, and that along with cancer treatment and discovery. Innovative and affordable care is going to help us to make progress in lung cancer, something I've dedicated my 25-year career to, and I'm so touched that you thought of me for this year's award. But it's really about the patients. These are our patients, the patients who are on these early trials. I met this man on one of our bike rides. It was an interesting story. It was a 75-mile bike ride. I was nearly ready to pass out, and he came up to me and goes, "Dr. Herbst?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "I'm on one of your phase 1 trials." I said, "Really?" And how can I not continue to ride with him? He actually passed me after about a mile. He was just being nice to me. But we have to keep our patients going. We have to support them. And I just want to thank you all again. And I really want to thank the ACCC. What an amazing organization. You can see how much work they do. So thank you. I really am honored to be here today.